Hello and welcome back. Today I'd like to share this wonderful harvest painting demo with you, and I hope you'll find it really helpful if you come to paint anything similar to this. So let's get into the demo. Hello and welcome back to my studio. It's Lois here from Lois and Morgana Davidson Art, and today I'm going to be painting this stormy harvest scene. We're having quite a damp, cold summer here in the UK at the moment, so I thought I'd paint something that was inspired by that and inspired by this wonderful photograph that I found on Pixabay. I shall leave the link in the description below. So the first thing I always do is look closely at the inspiration photograph and decide what I want to leave out. And while in the photograph, this large hay bale in the foreground is really interesting and makes a great focal point, I think it's a bit distracting in terms of a more general landscape painting. So I've decided to leave that out, and I've reduced the number of hay bales just to make it a little bit more simple and increase the drama in the sky because of the current weather we're experiencing here. But first, a quick plug for my new book, Landscapes in Watercolour, Techniques and Tutorials for the Complete Beginner. It's available to purchase in all good bookstores, and I'll leave a couple of links in the description below. Here's my sketch. Pause the video if you'd like to take a closer look at it. I'm using the field of straw stubble to show the perspective of the scene. You can see the perspective lines leading to the vanishing point in the distance. I've painted the hay bales with masking fluid to protect the white paper because I want them to be a little bit lighter than the stubble field. I'm going to use the wet in wet technique to paint the sky to start with. So I'm going to wet the sky down as far as the distant hills using a large wash brush. I am going to be using my Princeton Aqua Elite 1.5 inch modeler brush, and I'm wetting the sky down to the horizon line, and I'm wetting it in most places. There's a few slightly sort of just dryish patches here and there so that I can get a bit of variety when I paint my sky, using raw sienna to start with to give it a little bit of atmosphere to the sky, just flicking in a very light value of raw sienna here and there, and then going in with a mid value of Payne's grey. Because this will soften and diffuse, it will lighten up a lot more than it is at the moment. But I'm looking for that sort of threatening rainy summer sky that's going to put the distant hills and trees into deep shadow. Sorry about that wobble, I just bashed into the tripod. It can be a bit awkward painting around the tripod, but you can see that I'm trying to paint around the clouds, leaving the unpainted paper to become the clouds as the grey paint sort of diffuses into those areas. And I can squeeze all the paint out of my brush, and using it just damp, I can soften back a few areas. And I'm going to wipe off the horizon line or the top of that hillside with a tissue so I don't get the paint running down over that area. Again, a clean, damp mop brush, pulling out a little bit of the paint just to lighten it in places. So I've got variety in my shades of grey and my values in the sky. Lighter on the right and darker over on the left. Now, while I'm waiting for my sky to dry, I'm going to use the wet on dry technique to paint in a first layer on this stubble field. Following my lines of perspective and my large wash brush, I'm dragging raw sienna, and then it'll be some raw umber as well, across the field, trying to keep the directionality so that I can get the road, sort of the crop lines of the stubble field. Still following the lines of perspective, I'm using my palette knife to scrape through the rich paint so that I can create some different marks. And once I'm happy with that first layer, I'm going to carry on now and put some green across the distant hills. This is sap green, and I've added a bit of burnt sienna to it just to make it a little bit earthier. And I'm using my size 14 Escoda Perla brush to paint it across, following my pencil lines. I can soften it back here and there, maybe create a little bit of variety to the greens. See, I've got a nice hard edge across my hilltop because I waited for this sky to dry. If I'd painted into the sky, then I would have had a softer edge there, which would have been nice for a different type of scene. But for this scene, I want that hard edge because I'm going to put some really dark green trees across the top of the hill and across the midground at the back of the stubble field to really make things stand out. I've just added a bit of perylene green to my mixture, adding that variety and getting it a little bit darker across the horizon line. And now, using almost tube consistency perylene green, I'm going to paint in this tree and hedge line, keeping it nice and dark because it's in deep shadow. It's also that deep green summer foliage. And now creating a tree line on the hilltop, working into the damp paint, still using this nice rich mixture so it will stay there, diffuse very gently into the hill. I can soften that if I need to, if the dark drops into the hill a bit too much, and I can put a tree line on the hilltop on the other side as well. I'm just scraping a couple of tree trunks into that tree line and hedge line. Not much, just a couple, just enough to add a bit of variety. And now that part of the painting is just about done. I'm going to mix up a glaze of a sort of greyish colour to increase the value and the cloud shadow across my stubble field. My stubble field is completely dry. It's really important that your painting is bone dry if you apply a glaze. I'm just going to drag that grey colour, which has been mixed from raw umber and a touch of Payne's grey, plenty of water, dragging it very quickly over the stubble field to increase the shadow and the depth. I can add a little bit more bright raw sienna a bit later, maybe dab off with a tissue just to bring a bit of lightness back in places. And then add texture again with my palette knife. So slowly trying to build up the illusion of cloud shadows and this stubble field with the crop lines radiating out from the vanishing point. And I shall dab in a drier mix of raw sienna across the front in the foreground, following sort of horizontal lines to give an impression of the stubble, and maybe a few little short stubby marks made with the palette knife to enhance that impression. And then to finish this section off, I shall use a piece of paper to protect the sky and then use a fan brush and spatter on some Payne's grey and raw sienna to add texture to the foreground. And now the last thing before I paint in the hay bales is to put in a nice sort of slightly brighter green across the middle ground field here. This is sap green, but I've added a bit of little bit of cerulean blue to it just to brighten it up a bit, so it looks like the sun's just catching that field a bit. And I can add a little bit of perylene green to that mixture once the lighter mix is in, and add a little bit of variety to that, following the lines of perspective. And now everything must dry completely before I can remove the masking fluid from the hay bales. So I'm just checking to make sure it is fully dry, and it is, so I can use my rubber cement pickup, which is like a large eraser, to remove the masking fluid. You can rub it off with a clean finger, or you can use the sticky side of a piece of masking tape to remove it. We can see now those hay bales appearing as if by magic, all nicely in perspective. Once I've removed it, just use a clean dry brush to rub off any sort of crumbs of masking fluid, and then I can go in and, using some raw sienna and a little bit of raw umber to start with, I can paint in my hay bales, and I can add a little bit of burnt umber, maybe a bit of Payne's grey, and get the shadows in. I've been fairly careful and slow with this fine-pointed calligraphy brush, putting in the shadows. And now I'm going to remove the tape and have a look at it and see if I think the shadows are right. And if I think the shadows look okay, then I will put a little bit of white gouache on the top of each one of the hay bales as a little highlight where the sun or the light is catching it. And this should hopefully just be the finishing touch. I'm using quite a small detail brush for this because it literally is a tiny dab on some of these really small ones, but it's quite important that they catch the light. So just across the top, so the highlights and the shadows are now giving me this rounded cylindrical shape of these hay bales. And if the white gouache was to dry back a bit too light, I could put another coat on, but I think it's okay. Now I'm happy with that. It's a subtle effect. It's just enough light to get those hay bales to stand out against the stubble field, but also against the contrasting tree and hedge line in the middle ground. I hope you found that demo useful. For me, it really evokes the kind of summer that we're having here in the UK. You never know, it might get a little bit sort of warmer and we may get some more blue sky days into August if we're lucky. Thank you so much for watching, and please click on the thumbs up button if you enjoyed the video. And don't forget to follow the links below if you're interested in my new book on watercolour landscape painting. And thank you so much to everybody that supports us and this channel on Patreon. We really do appreciate you. I'll see you again soon. Take care and happy painting. Bye.